Hi, this is Bill Strahan. Welcome to the Messy Shop. I'll clean it up later. Right now, I want to start a series of videos showing how I made some titanium earrings on my Tormach 1100 MX. And I'll jump into Fusion 360. We'll dive through it. This is my first attempt at this. Be patient. Hopefully each video will get better. Subscribe and find out. So the place we're going to end up at the end of this video is going to be this op1. This is my stock. These are my two earrings. I'm going to roll the marker back and I'm going to show you how I arrived at this. So jumping all the way back to the beginning, I start by creating just a basic circular shape. There's my sketch. It is 25 millimeters in diameter. Pretty straightforward stuff here. Just some tangent arcs, a 1.6 millimeter hole to hang that on an earring hook. And I'm going to talk a little bit, I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to talk a little bit about how this fixed jaw and moving jaw just jumped right in here. I had this soft jaw set up for another part I was making. It was actually still in my vise. And this pocket, I can take a glance at it and see it is not quite 3 millimeters apart. So I just need to take a little bit off this jaw, or these jaws, and I'll have a new set of soft jaws to work with. I'm done with that part. So I used Fusion 360's insert derive functionality to go grab these parts out of that project. I dropped them in here, and then it just takes me a moment to create a sketch and extrude into those soft jaws, and I just cut that away. I may go into that in more detail later. Fusion 360's insert derive is super awesome functionality. It allows me to reuse things in modeling, and in this case, I get to reuse it in the real world as well. I just need to go take 3 millimeters off the top of these soft jaws that are already in the vise, and that'll just take a moment, and then I've got new soft jaws to work with. So I'm gonna talk more about the soft jaws in later parts. Now I want to dive into the earrings, so I'm going to take the soft jaws, turn those off, and we're going to go into the earrings. So my goal was to have two earrings, and each side would represent a 90-degree view of the world. So I found some graphics I liked. I did some modifications to those in some image editing software, ultimately created an SVG from it, and you can see, I'm going to change how I have that working. You can see I've got two different versions of the globe there. I'm going to make a second earring, work my way through this. Okay, at this point I have two earrings. This one has views of Africa and part of the Americas. Those are 90 degrees apart. And this one has Far East, Australia, and Americas on this side. So I need to machine an op1 on these, and that's the subject of this video, so we're going to jump straight into it. The first thing I do is I'm going to create a quick stock setup. I like to model my stock, and I happen to know that I have some stock laying around that is left over from another project. It is inch wide. It's actually 25.3, slightly undersized. That's fine. But it's supposed to be an inch wide, and it's 47 millimeters in length. So I'm going to model up two pieces of stock to take out two earrings from. And I know my vise jaws are 127 millimeters edge to edge on the outside. So this way I can model it in a way that's going to fit in my vise, and I only have to probe one corner, and that will make more sense in a moment. So let's just go ahead and walk into this. I finished my sketch, and then I do my extrude. The first thing you'll notice, I set the appearance on my stock to be glass medium color blue. So if you go to glass color density and select medium color blue, drag and drop that on there. What I like about that is I control the opacity that way. So those are my stock pieces. And I'm going to get out of there. I'm going to put the two pieces in my stock. I made copies, and I dropped them in with a joint. So there is a joint between this earring and this piece of stock, and a joint between this earring and this piece of stock. And the nice thing about setting that to the glass is I can see through the stock. It's somewhat transparent. You can do a similar thing by right-clicking and going to opacity control and setting some percentage. It's just so much easier for me to just drag and drop blue glass onto it. And if later I say, you know what, I don't want it transparent and I want it back to transparent, I find that a lot easier than right-clicking, selecting opacity, and then deciding it's not opaque enough or it's too opaque. So that's why I make them glass. At this point, this is ready to machine for op. So I need to cut out the basic shape, and I need to somehow machine the deeper part here. Let me zoom in. I kind of glossed over that. I'm going to turn off my stock. When I created the earring, what I did was I set my water features, I believe, 0.3 millimeters lower than the land features. Yes, that is the case. So I'm going to make these from titanium. These are tiny. I'm going to have to get in there as best I can with a ball and mill. So let's jump into the cam, take a look at that. First thing I need to do is I need to set up my model correctly. So if I go into the setup here, you can see, first of all, the two bodies. I have these selected. I modeled the part that the earring hook goes into as a separate body. Now they're touching each other, but they're separate bodies. And I did that, I can go into that in a separate video, but it makes certain things I'm doing easier. Details of that don't matter, but that's why there are only two bodies selected, and I have not selected those. I select them individually where I need to in the individual toolpaths. You can add a model into a toolpath that's not part of your setup. On the stock, I selected from solid. I've selected these two bodies, and I've set my work origin to be the back left top corner of this piece of stock. And because I modeled these outer edges 127 millimeters apart, all I have to do is drop these both in a vise on parallels and probe that point, and I can machine both parts at once. Piece of cake. It's nice to do it that way if you know, especially for a one-off. That way you don't have to set up separate work coordinate systems, which means you don't have to probe separate coordinate systems, which also means the mill isn't wasting any time doing like a safe retract in between switching work areas. So this is all done in one work area. So the first thing is an adaptive. I have a 1/4 inch Speed Tiger IPVE end mill. It's a 1/4 inch end mill designed for titanium and stainless steel, and it does a fantastic job. Do an adaptive, do a contour to make that outer edge nice. And then I have a chamfer. It's really just the slightest of edge breaks because that edge is pretty sharp. A spot drill, and drill with 1.5 millimeter the hole for the hook. And then I have a morph spiral. I'm not going to go into much detail on that, but that's how I get this surface to match this surface, even though these are separate bodies. And in the morph spiral, I have to select that body in addition to the model body. Then I have the spiral, and the spiral just spirals its way in. It has a fixed step over of 0.05 millimeters, so a little less than 2/1000ths of an inch. It's using a Rogue Carbide 1/32 inch ball mill, little tiny thing. First time I saw it, I thought if I breathed on it, it would break. And I'm just spiraling in, and it's changing Z height to machine the different surfaces. And then the last part is just I chamfer that right there. Okay, so let's simulate, and remember that I am creating both of these at the same time. I'm going to go into simulation, and I'm going to start this running. First part is this adaptive that's removing the bulk of the material, and I set the part 1 millimeter into the stock, so it has to clean up the top surface as well. Now I'm going to zoom in and talk about a few things. Number one, the reason I am machining so far below the bottom edge, so right there is the bottom of the earring itself. All the rest of this I'm removing because I don't want to have to machine all that away. So for Op 2, which I'll cover later, when this flips over into soft jaws, you're only holding on to at most 1.5 millimeters. It's 1.6 millimeters thick. So this would easily rip it out of the jaws. It's easiest for me to hold this with a pair of vice grips, and then I'll just go to my bandsaw and cut along this edge, and that way I'll only have a millimeter, maybe 1.5 millimeters sticking up here. I won't have any of the rectangular part left, and that will make Op2 a lot easier. It just means that my first adaptive in Op1 needs to be deep enough to give me room to cut that off. Okay, it started machining over here, so I'm going to zoom in on this. This is the Africa and part of the Americas. And as that spirals in, it's just changing Z to follow whatever the surface is. And I've got my accuracy, or excuse me, my tolerance set to 100th of a millimeter. So these little blue areas, that's just where it's transitioning from the floor on this surface up to that area. It's a pretty small end mill, but I can't machine it perfectly, at least not with that size end mill. Okay, so it's machining the second one now. These are the Americas. And same as before, it's just going to spiral in. When it's done with the spiral and the final contour to clean up that hole that the earring hooks will go through, then that's it for Op1. This is pretty straightforward. I tried to keep it short. This is my first attempt at this. I will make some video of the machining, what I can get. It's hard to see with the flood coolant. It is titanium, and so I keep flood coolant on it pretty continuously. But I'll see if I can get some footage of that, and then I'll talk about cutting that off. We'll walk through Op2. I'll go into finishing and all of that. We'll see how it turns out. All right, I'm going to stop there. That takes things through Op1. I kind of went through it pretty quickly. Like I said, I'm new to this. I'll figure out, I'll kind of hit my stride after, I'm sure, a handful of videos. So leave me feedback, subscribe, let me know what you'd like to see, what you'd like more of, less of, etc. And I'll keep them coming. Thanks so much.